When you chase, something subtle but powerful happens inside you. Your attention moves outward, your emotional center shifts, and without realizing it, you begin to negotiate your worth. You wait for replies. You reread messages. You adjust your words to sound more pleasing, more acceptable, more right. And little by little, you stop being present with yourself. This is not love. This is anxiety wearing the costume of connection. Chasing is exhausting because it asks you to abandon your natural rhythm. You respond faster than you want to. You explain things that don't need explaining. You offer reassurance before it is asked for. And while none of this seems harmful on the surface, it sends a quiet message. I need you to feel okay about myself. That message is not spoken, but it is felt. And once it is felt, attraction begins to weaken. Not because the other person is cruel, but because desire cannot breathe where urgency dominates. Self-respect works in the opposite direction. It does not demand attention, it allows it. When you respect yourself, you don't disappear, but you also don't pursue at any cost. You answer when you have something to say, not when silence feels uncomfortable. You express interest without surrendering your boundaries. You understand that closeness is something that grows naturally, not something that can be forced through consistency or sacrifice alone. People are not drawn to those who revolve around them. They are drawn to those who stand firmly in their own lives. When someone senses that your world does not collapse in their absence, a shift occurs. Suddenly you are not predictable. Your presence is no longer guaranteed, and the mind reacts strongly to that uncertainty. Not with fear, but with attention. Chasing tries to secure a result. Self-respect allows one. This difference changes everything. When you stop chasing, you stop trying to convince someone of your value. You let your behavior speak instead. You show that you have standards, that your time matters, that your emotions are not available to anyone who only partially shows up. And that quiet confidence is far more persuasive than any declaration of affection. There is a common misunderstanding that pulling back means playing games or pretending not to care. That is not what self-respect looks like. Self-respect is not coldness, it is clarity. It is knowing how much you can give without losing yourself. It is being warm without being desperate, present without being dependent. And when someone feels that balance in you, they feel safe and intrigued at the same time. The paradox is simple. The more you chase, the more you try to be seen, the less visible you become. Your effort blends into the background. But when you stop running after attention, when you stop feeling every silence, your absence becomes noticeable. Silence, when it comes from self-respect, has a weight that words do not. This is why people start thinking about you when you stop chasing. Not because you vanished, but because you stayed whole. You did not punish them with distance, you simply returned to yourself. And that return creates a vacuum. The emotional access they once had without effort is no longer automatic. And the mind, uncomfortable with loss, begins to replay memories, conversations, moments of closeness. You become a presence again, not through effort, but through restraint. Self-respect also changes the way you tolerate behavior. You no longer overlook indifference just to stay connected. You no longer accept mixed signals as a challenge to try harder. Instead, you observe, you respond, you choose. And that ability to choose, calmly, without drama, is deeply attractive. It signals maturity, it signals strength. It signals that being with you is a privilege, not a favor. When you understand this, you stop asking, how do I make them think about me? And start asking, how do I stop abandoning myself? And that shift alone changes your energy. You become grounded. You become steady. You become someone whose presence is felt even in absence. Because in the end, attraction is not created by pursuit, but by self-possession. And nothing lingers longer in the mind than someone who knows their worth and walks away without losing their peace. The moment you hear the phrase 3 words, the mind wants to turn it into a formula. Something you say once and wait for a reaction. Something external, visible, almost mechanical. But that way of thinking misses the essence entirely. These 3 words are not meant to be performed, they are meant to be inhabited. They are not a sentence designed to influence someone else's emotions, but a decision that reshapes your own inner posture. When you repeat, "I choose myself," you are not declaring independence from love, nor are you closing the door to connection. You are simply restoring order. For a long time, many of us place ourselves second without noticing. We adjust schedules, moods, expectations. We delay our needs. We tolerate confusion. And we tell ourselves we are doing it for love, when in reality we are doing it to avoid loss. The three words interrupt that pattern. They force a pause. They ask a quiet but confronting question. At this moment, am I betraying myself to stay close to someone else? This is why the words work internally before they ever show up externally. You may never say them out loud to another person, yet they will still be felt. When you choose yourself, your behavior changes without effort. You don't rush to respond when you are emotionally unsettled. You don't agree just to keep the peace. You don't minimize your discomfort to avoid tension. And that shift is unmistakable. The mind wants techniques. The ego wants control. But attraction does not respond to instructions. It responds to authenticity. When you choose yourself, you stop acting from fear. And fear has a very specific texture. It sounds like over-explaining, it looks like over-availability, it feels like waiting for permission to relax. When that fear dissolves, so does the behavior that repels connection without us realizing it. Choosing yourself also brings something else into the relationship: coherence. Your words and actions begin to align. You no longer say it's fine when it isn't. You no longer smile while feeling resentful. You become emotionally legible. And clarity is comforting. Even when someone doesn't consciously understand what has changed, they sense stability. They sense that they are interacting with someone who is grounded rather than reactive. This is where the misunderstanding often appears. People fear that choosing themselves will make them selfish, distant, or unloving. But the opposite is true. When you stop seeking validation, you become freer to give affection without expectation. You listen without calculating. You show care without keeping score. You are present because you want to be, not because you are afraid not to be. The three words also dismantle fantasy. They pull you out of imagined futures and bring you back to present reality. Instead of asking, "What could this become?" you begin asking, "How does this feel right now?" That question is powerful because it centers truth rather than hope. And truth has a way of simplifying things. It tells you when to stay, when to speak, and when to step back without drama. As you repeat these words internally, something else happens. You stop chasing clarity from others because you start offering it to yourself. You no longer need constant reassurance because your decisions are no longer outsourced. This independence is not cold, it is calm. And calm is contagious. It invites respect. It invites reflection. It invites someone else to meet you at your level rather than above or below it. And this is where the so-called effect appears. When you stop centering someone else emotionally, they feel the shift. Not as rejection, but as distance from something that once felt automatic. The attention you gave without limits now has borders. The emotional access they enjoyed without effort now requires presence. And the human mind notices that immediately. They may not understand it. They may not articulate it. But they feel the difference between someone who needs them and someone who chooses them. One creates pressure. The other creates desire. One asks to be reassured. The other stands calmly in its own worth. So if those three words echo anywhere, let them echo inside you first. Let them shape your pauses, your boundaries, your responses. Because when you stop using them as a tactic and start living them as a principle, the dynamic changes naturally. And what follows is not control but quiet power. There is a moment often unnoticed when constant presence loses its meaning. When you are always available, always responsive, always emotionally open, your presence stops being experienced as a choice and starts being assumed as a given. Nothing dramatic happens. No argument, no rejection, just a gradual fading of impact. This is not because your presence lacks value, but because value needs contrast to be felt. Emotional withdrawal, when it comes from self-respect rather than resentment, creates that contrast. It is not silence used as punishment, nor distance used to provoke guilt. It is simply the decision to stop overextending yourself where balance is missing, and that decision, though quiet, changes the emotional landscape immediately. The human mind is highly sensitive to patterns. When someone is consistently available, the mind adapts. It relaxes. It stops paying close attention. But when that pattern shifts, when the availability is no longer constant, attention returns. Not because something was taken away aggressively, but because something once reliable is now uncertain. And uncertainty awakens awareness. This is where presence is born from absence. When you step back emotionally, you are not disappearing, you are creating space. Space allows the other person's thoughts to move. It invites them to notice what they previously overlooked. The tone of your voice, the way you listened, the emotional safety you provided. These things often go unrecognized in real time, yet become vivid the moment they are no longer immediately accessible. Many people confuse emotional withdrawal with coldness, but the two are very different. Coldness shuts down. It builds walls. It carries bitterness. Healthy withdrawal, on the other hand, is warm but contained. You are still yourself, still kind, still honest, just no longer overinvested. You are no longer filling every gap. You allow silence to exist without rushing to resolve it. And silence, when it is calm, invites thought. When you stop reacting to every message, every mood, every shift in attention, something interesting happens. The dynamic equalizes. You are no longer the emotional regulator for the connection. The other person begins to carry their own emotional weight. They begin to initiate, to wonder, to reflect, not because you demanded it, but because the emotional responsibility is no longer one-sided. This is why emotional withdrawal creates psychological presence. Your mind is no longer constantly focused outward, and theirs is no longer passively receiving. Instead, they begin to mentally revisit you. They replay conversations, they interpret pauses, they assign meaning where before there was predictability. And meaning, not frequency, is what keeps someone present in another person's thoughts. There's also a deeper layer to this. When you withdraw emotionally, you stop reinforcing imbalanced dynamic. You stop rewarding inconsistency with constant availability. You stop absorbing ambiguity as if it were intimacy. And that shift sends a powerful signal. Company, connection with you has value, and value is not limitless. This does not mean you become distant for effect. It means you become selective out of respect. You invest where there is reciprocity. You respond where there is clarity. You engage where there is mutual effort. And when those elements are missing, you do not protest. You pause. That pause does more than words ever could. People often feel the urge to explain their withdrawal, to justify it, to soften it with reassurance. But true emotional grounding needs no explanation. When you are centered, your behavior is self-explanatory. You don't need to announce boundaries, they are felt. You don't need to demand attention. Your absence creates it naturally. What the other person experiences in this moment is not abandonment, but contrast. They compare how it felt when you were always there to how it feels now. And in that comparison, your emotional presence becomes clearer, not because you ask to be valued, but because you allow space for value to be recognized. This is not manipulation. It is self-alignment. You are no longer leaking energy into a connection that cannot hold it. You are conserving your emotional resources, and when someone senses that you are no longer endlessly available, they reassess, not consciously at first, but emotionally. They begin to think about you not because you tried to enter their mind, but because you stopped occupying every moment of it. You gave their thoughts room to move toward you on their own. And that is the quiet truth. When presence is no longer constant, it becomes memorable. And what is memorable lingers long after silence begins. Control is comforting to the mind. It gives the illusion of safety, predictability, and certainty. When we feel we can anticipate someone's reactions, access their attention at will, and rely on their emotional availability without effort, the mind relaxes. But relaxed attention fades quickly. What remains present in the mind is not what is controlled, but what escapes it. This is why people are drawn to what they cannot fully grasp. Not out of immaturity or insecurity, but because the human mind is wired to notice what is unresolved. When something feels complete, it is filed away. When something feels open-ended, it stays active. And nothing creates open-endedness like the quiet realization that someone is no longer emotionally predictable. When you stop trying to manage someone's perception of you, when you stop adjusting your behavior to ensure a certain response, you give up control. But what you gain is far more powerful. You become spontaneous rather than strategic, authentic rather than calculated. And authenticity is impossible to fully control from the outside. The moment you release the need to secure outcomes, the dynamic shifts. You are no longer performing to maintain interest. You are no longer monitoring reactions for reassurance. You are simply present when you choose to be. And that choice, Faye, LT but unspoken, introduces uncertainty, the kind that awakens curiosity rather than fear. Curiosity is born when the mind encounters something it cannot fully predict. When your availability, reactions, and emotional energy are no longer guaranteed, the other person's attention sharpens. They begin to observe rather than assume. They listen more closely. They read between the lines. Not because you demanded focus, but because unpredictability invites it. This unpredictability is not chaos, it is consistency with yourself, not with someone else's expectations. You are still stable, still coherent, still kind, but no longer adjustable. You do not bend your emotional posture to maintain harmony at all costs. And when someone realizes they cannot pull you into any emotional state on demand, something shifts in how they perceive you. People are unconsciously drawn to emotional sovereignty, to those who govern their own inner world, rather than outsourcing it. When your mood does not rise and fall with someone else's attention, when your sense of self remains intact regardless of how someone shows up, you become psychologically autonomous. And autonomy is compelling because it cannot be possessed. This is why trying to control attraction always backfires. The more you attempt to secure someone's interest, the more you reveal your dependence on it. And dependence creates predictability. Predictability creates complacency. Complacency dulls desire. The cycle is quiet but relentless. Releasing control interrupts that cycle. When you no longer need reassurance to feel grounded, the other person feels the difference. They sense that their approval is no longer the axis around which you turn. And that realization can be unsettling in the best way. It invites them to step forward rather than lean back. The mind also has a natural resistance to losing influence. When someone realizes they no longer shape your emotional state as easily as before, they begin to test the distance. They reach out, they initiate, they re-engage, not consciously to reclaim control, but to restore a sense of connection that now feels uncertain. This is not manipulation. It is the natural response to lost leverage. Emotional independence removes leverage without confrontation. You do not argue, explain, or accuse. You simply stop being governed, and that quiet shift forces the other person to relate to you differently. Uncontrollability, in this sense, does not mean being distant or erratic. It means being internally anchored. Your reactions are no longer automatic. Your availability is no longer unconditional. And when those elements are no longer assumed, they become valued. There is also a deeper respect that emerges here. When someone cannot control you, they are more likely to respect you. Boundaries are clearer. Interactions are more intentional. The dynamic matures, and maturity, though less dramatic than chaos, holds attention far longer. So when you stop trying or manage how someone thinks or feels about you, when you let go of control and return it to where it belongs, within yourself, you become something the mind cannot dismiss easily. Because what cannot be controlled must be considered, and what must be considered is never forgotten. There is a fine line between influence and manipulation, and that line is always defined by intention. Manipulation begins the moment the focus shifts from inner alignment to external control. It asks, what can I do to make them feel, think, or act a certain way? Dignity, on the other hand, asks a very different question. How can I remain loyal to myself regardless of how they respond? One seeks power over another. The other restores power within. This distinction matters because many people are uncomfortable with the idea of stepping back. They worry it looks calculated, they fear it might seem like a tactic, a silent strategy designed to provoke a reaction. But when your withdrawal is rooted in dignity rather than agenda, there is no performance involved. You are not trying to create desire, you are responding to imbalance. You are not withholding to punish, you are conserving to protect. Manipulation requires constant awareness of the other person, their reactions, their moods, their timing. It is exhausting because it demands vigilance. Dignity is quiet because it does nothing of the other person. It simply sets a limit and honors it. When you stop overgiving, not to gain leverage, but to regain yourself, your energy changes, and that change is felt immediately. The problem with manipulation is not just ethical, it is psychological. It keeps you trapped in the very dependency you're trying to escape. You become hyper-focused on outcomes. You wait for signs. You interpret silence. You measure success by reaction. In doing so, you hand your emotional stability to someone else. Dignity takes that stability back. When you act from dignity, you are not invested in controlling the narrative. You don't need to appear indifferent, mysterious, or strong. You simply are grounded. You speak when something matters. You pause when something feels off. You don't escalate to be noticed, and you don't shrink to be accepted. This neutrality is powerful because it cannot be exploited. There is also an honesty that dignity preserves. You are not pretending not to care when you do. You are not suppressing emotion to seem unaffected. You allow yourself to feel, but you do not allow feelings to override self-respect. That balance creates integrity, and integrity has a stabilizing effect on relationships, even when it introduces distance. Manipulation often leads to short-term results and long-term damage. It creates cycles of push and pull, anxiety and relief. Dignity creates clarity. It may not always produce immediate closeness, but it produces something far more valuable: emotional safety. Safety not in the sense of predictability, but in the sense of trust. Trust that you will not abandon yourself to maintain connection. When someone senses that you are not trying to manage them, they relax. Even if they feel the distance, they don't feel threatened by it. They don't feel cornered or coerced. Instead, they feel invited to step forward voluntarily. That invitation is subtle, but it carries weight because it is free of pressure. This is why dignity never needs justification. You don't announce that you are pulling back. You don't explain your silence. You don't frame boundaries as ultimatums. You simply live them. And when someone asks, you answer calmly, without accusation. That calmness is not indifference, it is self-trust. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are acting in alignment with yourself. You sleep better. You second-guess less. You don't replay conversations trying to adjust them in hindsight. And that internal peace is the strongest signal you can send. Not because it manipulates someone into missing you, but because it reminds them that connection with you is built on something real. If someone responds to your dignity by stepping closer, it is because they recognize its value. If they step away, it is because the connection depended on your self-sacrifice. Either way, dignity clarifies, and clarity is always a form of self-respect. So let go of the need to label your behavior as strategy or technique. Let it be alignment. Let it be the moment you stop negotiating your worth for attention. Because when your actions are rooted in dignity rather than manipulation, whatever follows is not a game. It is the natural consequence of self-respect. There is a quiet irony in all of this. The moment you stop trying to be thought of, you become unforgettable. Not because you did something dramatic or clever, but because you finally stopped interfering with your own presence. When self-worth becomes the foundation, everything else becomes secondary, including the outcome. So often the mind is fixated on effect. Did they notice? Are they thinking about me? Did the silence work? These questions keep you tethered to the very validation you are trying to release. But self-worth dissolves the need for answers. It shifts the focus from being remembered to being rooted. And rooted people leave impressions without effort. When you genuinely value yourself, your actions carry coherence. You don't fluctuate to be liked. You don't perform to be chosen. You move through interactions with a sense of internal permission. Permission to speak honestly. Permission to step back. Permission to walk away without resentment. This permission is felt by others even when it is never named. If someone starts thinking about you in this state, it is not because you engineered their thoughts. It is because something in them recognized your groundedness. The human mind is drawn to stability in a world of emotional noise. When someone encounters a presence that is calm, self-contained, and unapologetically who play, it stands out, it lingers. This is the side effect of self-worth. You stop chasing, and the chase reverses itself. But not in the way the ego expects. It is not dramatic pursuit or sudden obsession. It is quieter. Someone pauses before replying. They reread messages. They replay moments of connection. They wonder where your energy went and why it feels different now. What they are responding to is not absence alone, but contrast. The difference between who you were when you were seeking validation and who you are when you no longer need it. That difference is unmistakable. It has a gravity that cannot be fabricated. Self-worth also changes your tolerance. You no longer romanticize inconsistency. You no longer interpret minimal effort as hidden depth. You see behavior clearly and respond accordingly. And this clarity removes confusion from the dynamic. Confusion keeps people emotionally lazy. Clarity invites decision. When you stop over-investing, you also stop over-imagining. You are no longer living in hypothetical futures or decoding mixed signals. You're present with what is happening now. That presence makes your responses measured rather than reactive. And measured responses carry authority. They signal that you are not operating from lack. There is something deeply unsettling and deeply attractive about someone who does not need you to complete them. Not because they are distant, but because they are full. Full people don't grasp, they don't cling, they connect freely or not at all. And that freedom invites respect before it invites desire. If someone thinks about you because of this, it is not your victory. It is simply the mind reacting to something it cannot categorize easily. You are no longer available in the way you once were, yet you are not closed. You are no longer predictable, yet you are consistent. This combination creates psychological presence without effort. And if they don't think about you, that answer is just as valuable. It tells you that the connection existed because you were abandoning yourself. Self-worth always reveals truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. But discomfort fades, dignity remains. The real success here is not being missed. It is being intact, being able to stand in your own life without waiting for someone else to validate it, being able to choose connection without losing autonomy. That is the position from which all healthy attraction flows. So let the idea of controlling outcomes dissolve. Let the focus return to yourself. Because when self-worth leads, whatever follows is not a tactic, not a trick, not a strategy. It is simply the echo of someone who finally stopped chasing and started standing still.